West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
So, more audio tapes have leaked of Donald Trump with the co-editor-in-chief of Variety, Ramin Sotoudeh. In the new audio, Donald Trump brags that all that matters with the media and how easy it is to manipulate the media and news networks like CNN is just get good ratings and they'll do whatever the heck you want to do. It's a really disturbing audio, but look, I know you and I are sick and tired of Donald Trump's voice, so before playing you the leaked audio, what I want to show you though are the metrics and the data that actually matters. The ratings that we should be focused on here in the United States of America. First, let's take a look at some of the real ratings that matter, like this. Remember when Donald Trump said that under President Biden, the stock market would crash? Take a look at this. The stock market is nearly double under President Biden than Donald Trump. This is objective data we're looking at, but we shouldn't base our economy on the stock market, although the corporate media, every time the stock market would go up under Donald Trump, they'd make that like a front page story before COVID. How about this though? The rate of job growth has been 40 times higher under President Biden than it was under the last 3 Republican presidents. 40 times higher. And we can look at objective criteria like this. Let's look at the ratings that actually should matter to me, you, and our fellow Americans and the world. Let's take a look at this job growth chat. You see the job growth under President Biden. You see the job decline under Donald Trump. More Biden jobs boom outpacing Trump significantly. Let's talk about wages and the wage growth tracker, significantly higher under President Biden. Let's talk about production of crude oil. The United States produces now more crude oil under President Biden than any country ever in the history of the world, while President Biden is still focused on leading the world on climate change initiatives. Oil, gas, and renewable energy production are now at all-time highs under President Biden. These are the ratings that should matter. America is more energy independent than ever. Remember when Donald Trump and corporate media pushed the narratives that Biden's going to destroy the oil industry? We hit a new all-time high on oil production. How about President Biden's CHIPS Act, which has revitalized the semiconductor industry here in the United States, creating many, many, many new jobs. Well, the CHIPS Act is attracting an insane amount of investment. The U.S. is now on pace to add more investment in electronics manufacturing construction this year alone as it did in total from 1996 until the passage of the CHIPS Act. Just think about that this year alone outpacing 96 to 2006 to 2016. I mean, we're talking 30 plus years. How about this manufacturing boom under President Biden? Total construction spending in U.S. manufacturing at an all-time high. How about crime at an all-time low? Significant reductions in crime when crime was at its highest, objectively, when Donald Trump was in office. How about household wealth? Let's take a look at another chart. Average household wealth for those under 40 in the U.S. is up 49% from its pre-pandemic level. It's what's being referred to as Young America's wealth boom. How about this next chart? Primary takeaway from claims data through the first 3 months of 2024 translates to the best jobs market in the past half century, with wages now outpacing inflation. How about what JP Morgan said recently? That the U.S. has achieved U.S. energy independence for the first time in 40 years, while Europe and China compete for global energy resources. Take a look at this chart right here. How about this data? How about this chart? Data suggests that the American economy may be on the verge of a productivity renaissance, the type of productivity that the U.S. economy has not experienced since the period between 1995 and 2004. How about we look at additional economic growth? By way of a wide margin, the U.S. has the highest cumulative real economic growth of any G7 country post-COVID. Want to talk about more ratings? Ratings that should actually matter to the American people, we the people. Investment in American manufacturing facilities contributed more to our economy's growth than it has in 40 years under President Biden. And as I said, violent crime went up under Trump and down significantly under President Biden. So those are the ratings that should matter. But here's what Donald Trump says in the leaked audio as part of his interview with Ramin Sotoudeh, who was writing a book on Donald Trump. He says, you could be as nasty and despicable as you want, just help the media get ratings, viewers, and that's all they're going to care about. Listen to what he had to say here.
So, if I went back to NBC right now to do something, they would do anything I wanted to do. Show business I'm talking about. Doing a show, anything I wanted to do right now, 100%. Because one thing I know about that business, and I learned that business better than anybody else can learn a business in a short period of time, it's all about one thing, the ratings. If you have ratings, you can be the meanest, most horrible human being in the world. There's only one thing that matters, ratings. You can be nice or you can be mean. You can be evil, you can be horrible, you can be crude or elegant. There's only one thing that matters, and that's ratings. If you don't have ratings, it doesn't matter.
And then in more audio captured by Ramin Sotoudeh, here Donald Trump talks about how he says he's killing Justice Engoron, giving Justice Engoron bad publicity in the press by showing photographs of Justice Engoron with his shirt off. That's what Donald Trump's bragging about. So he's got a bad judge in Engoron, but he's got photos of Justice Engoron with his shirt off at the gym. Here, play this clip.
And in the middle of our conversation, Donald Trump received a phone call where he asked for a directed verdict and then tried to offer his own analysis of what was happening in New York while he was in Florida.
Okay, let's listen.
Let me give it a shot, okay? All right. So they just finished up the trial. We won everything. We have a judge who just doesn't want to let it go. He's crazy. I don't know if you're liberal or not, but this guy is a radical left lunatic.
He's very liberal, and he's not a supporter of yours.
He's a political hack.
Yeah.
He's a real hack. When you look at him, he should have never had the case in the first place. He got it. A very dangerous system. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like very dangerous. The good news is we're killing him. He's getting horrible publicity.
Yeah, I saw that.
Horrible. The thing with his weightlifting and shit, he's crazy. He's a lunatic.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to let it go.
So that's what Trump is talking about over and over again. Ratings, ratings, ratings. And you take a look at what he posts all the time. They could get this is what he says about Jimmy Kimmel. They could get a far more talented person who would also get better ratings for 5% of what they're paying this loser. This is what he says about Bill Maher. Bill Maher is the worst. He never got it and never will. Bad ratings, a big fail on CNN shot, major case of Trump derangement syndrome, not worth the shot. Here's what he says about Fox. Rumors are flying high that idiot rhino Paul Ryan, by the way, who was the Republican Speaker of the House, hurt his credibility. Fox is going in the wrong direction. Ratings are headed down, and Murdoch just threw certain very good people who were correct under the bus. This is what Trump says about Jimmy Fallon. Can anyone imagine being critiqued by ratings-starved Jimmy Fallon, the bumbling, stumbling hostess that single-handedly reduced The Tonight Show to ashes? It's all ratings that he's talking about, but not the ratings that should matter to we the American people. Why should we be in some bizarro cosplay fascist reality show? Why is the media and MAGA trying to put us in that world? I just want to protect our families. I want us to go about living our lives in normalcy. Remember when Donald Trump said the following about ratings during COVID? He bragged about the ratings that he was getting on those deranged press conferences during COVID, while so many Americans were dying. And Trump mishandled it and said, like a miracle, it's all going to go away. He bragged about his press briefing ratings and stopped the scientists from doing their work. And he talked about injecting bleach into your arm. This is what he talked about. Play this clip.
See you tomorrow. Is that okay? Don't say that I cut it short. They'll say that's right. It could be almost tomorrow. But you know what? In the meantime, I'm sure people are enjoying it. Now I will say this. It's an incredibly dark topic, an incredibly horrible topic, and it's incredibly interesting. That's why everybody is, they're going crazy. They can't get enough of it, and they want to be.
And remember when Trump gave that deranged town hall before CNN? And remember what he said, that he was going to give them a Trump ratings boost? And this is when Caitlin Collins platformed him and he mocked his sexual assault victim, and they filled the crowd with MAGA people who were like laughing as he mocked his sexual assault victim and talked about pardoning January 6th insurrectionists. This was very revealing about what CNN has become. Here, play this clip.
I'll be doing CNN tonight, live from the great state of New Hampshire, because CNN is rightfully desperate to get those fantastic Trump ratings back. They were ratings like none other, and they want them back. They made me a deal I couldn't refuse. Could be the beginning of a new and vibrant CNN with no more fake news, or it could be a total disaster for all, including me. Let's see what happens tonight at 8 o'clock.
And so I leave you that to think about. Which ratings matter to you? The ratings that actually impact your life, or being an extra, an expendable extra in Trump's cosplay, fascist, dystopian American carnage? Decide which one you want, because it's a life or death decision.
It is Thursday, the 4th of July of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, of course, is convalescing and sleeping in this morning, so we will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays on an Independence Day. Yes, indeed. A little bit of, we got a little bit of spicy stuff for you today, indeed. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Okay, well, we, as in the royal we were going to do an actual normal show with a news read and an exceedingly long rant, as we are wont to do lately. But it's a holiday. So we, as in the royal we, you know what that means, have decided that, well, maybe we'll make it a bit easier on ourselves since we will be having some very hot weather here. And in lieu of the weather report from around the world, I'll just let you know that it's going to be hot everywhere. It is. And it's going to be really hot around here. We're going to be at 105 today. And then it's only going to dip into the low 60s tonight. We like it in the 50s. All right. And then tomorrow, we're slated to be around 110 to 115. And then over the weekend, we're supposed to be 115 or hotter. And knowing how it works around here, I would opt for the forecast that says it will be hotter than 115. Oh, my God. So that means I really need to get out while there is still a little cool in the morning and take care of some plants and make sure that they are well hydrated. Make sure the dog dishes are well filled with water. Bird baths, etc., etc., etc. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to play some clips from, well, from the news. And with that, we'll let you sit back, enjoy the holiday, make sure your dogs are well hydrated and taken care of during this night of bombast. And we'll see you tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Bon appetit.
Michael Popak, Legal AF. I'm back to do a deep dive of what's happened since the United States Supreme Court's decision in U.S. versus Fisher, which on paper, on the surface, looks like a death blow to the Department of Justice's ability to prosecute these Jan 6 insurrectionists and those in the future, including some named Donald Trump. I don't agree with that, and neither do other analysts, including those at Just Security. Let's first lay it out for you. There was a count that was used as one of the two highest level counts of charges against the Jan 6th insurrectionists by the Department of Justice. It's called obstruction of an official proceeding. The argument was that under one portion of that criminal statute, what we call 18 U.S.C. 1512 C2, that sounds complicated, but it really isn't. The argument for the Department of Justice, which was accepted by 14 out of 15 federal judges, was that the language there applied to anyone who tried to obstruct or interfere with an official proceeding. In this case, the Jan 6 insurrectionists basically trying to set fire to the building and try to assassinate elected officials and their staffers in order to stop the electoral count. That sounds like to any common person listening to the language of it in regular language, in regular English, to be obstruction. The reason they were there is no doubt. They thought that they were immune from charges. They thought that their president, cult leader, was going to get back into office. That's why they were filming each other. That's why they were putting everything in video up on social media. That's why they wore GoPros. That's why they communicated with what they thought was a lack of impunity from prosecution, because they thought their guy was going to get back in based on their actions to stop the count. So the Supreme Court disagreed and said, at least the 6-3 Supreme Court disagreed, including Ketanji Brown Jackson joining with the majority in ruling that the only way you can use 1512 C2 is if there is a a tampering with or a destruction of actual physical evidence, including the integrity of that evidence. But they also included, as noted in the concurrence by Ketanji Brown Jackson, they included a pathway for federal judges and the Department of Justice going forward to use 1512C2 even against Jan 6 insurrectionists and future insurrectionists, heaven forbid, that attack the Capitol after the next election. What's the pathway? The pathway is the word integrity. They left in there, and they in their opinion, written by Chief Justice Roberts, that if the integrity of the evidence and processes are being implicated or being interfered with or being compromised, then that could also support a 1512C2 charge. Why is that important? Because the two highest level charges that were used by the Department of Justice that carried the highest sentencing penalty of 20 years, one was seditious conspiracy. That was used against the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and others. But the other, against sort of the more run-of-the-mill violent insurrectionists, was obstruction of an official proceeding. And so having lost that, and I'm going to talk to you about what the Department of Justice is going to have to do now, because now that and I'll tease it here, now that 1512C2 has been ripped up by the Supreme Court, at least on paper, so to speak, in every plea deal, for everybody who took a plea deal related to that charge, it says in the Department of Justice plea deal that if the count 1512C2 is vacated for any reason, which has now been by the Supreme Court, Department of Justice can prosecute anew that same person who took the plea deal for other crimes related to the statement, and even the 1512C2 conduct that can no longer be charged can be used by the judge in sentencing. But here's the pathway that Ketanji Brown Jackson lays out that I think is very important for us to understand sort of the going forward here. Let me read it to you. She says, to amplify a portion of the majority opinion, which cites to just then Judge Sotomayor, before she was on the United States Supreme Court, when she was on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York, she talked about false evidence being created and fabricated, which also is a 1512C2 violation. What does that sound like? That sounds like Donald Trump and the others, Mike Roman, Ken Chesebro, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, working to fabricate fake elector certificates, false evidence to be used to try to influence Mike Pence to either choose between two competing slates of electors, one false, one true, or select the false electors. That's the use of false evidence. And that still survives under 1512C2. That's why in a prior hot take, I said Donald Trump is not out of the woods yet. And his counts will probably likely stand as applied by this United States Supreme Court. But listen to the words of Ketanji Brown Jackson in her concurrence, which amplifies why on page 8 and 9 of the majority decision, they made reference to false evidence. Listen to this. And in the integrity, remember, the key word here is integrity of the process being undermined, still supporting a 1512C2 charge. Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Jackson writes, that official proceeding, talking about the Jan 6th Congress's certification of the Electoral College vote, plainly use certain records, documents, or objects, that's in the statute, including, among others, those relating to the electoral votes themselves, the vote tallies, and the certificates. And it might well be that Fisher's conduct, he's the guy, the insurrectionist that's at the heart of the case, as alleged here, involved the impairment or the attempted impairment of the availability or integrity of things used during the Jan 6 proceeding in ways other than those specified in in the statute's overarching provision that precedes it, right? 1512C1. So what Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is saying to future district courts is that look at the conduct, and if it falls within this other pathway of impairment of the integrity of the process through use of their conduct, it may still fit within 1512C2. It's up to district court judges to decide that. And I think when you read that majority position together with Ketanji Brown Jackson's clarification, if you will, arising out of the false evidence component by Justice Sotomayor that also made its appearance early on in the opinion, you have the makings for how the Department of Justice going forward can use this not only against future insurrectionists, but the current ones, and salvage it. The older I get, the more I find myself wanting to be more intentional about the way I live, eat, and take care of my body. Mosh, which you may have heard about on Shark Tank, was founded by Maria Shriver and her son Patrick Schwarzenegger. And they have a simple mission: to create a conversation about brain health through food, education, and research. Mosh joined forces with the world's top scientists and functional nutritionists to go beyond your average protein bar. With 10 delicious flavors, including 3 that are plant-based, each Mosh bar is made with ingredients that support brain health, like ashwagandha, lion's mane, collagen, and omega-3s. Mosh is now the first and only food brand boosted with Cognizin, a premium nootropic that supplies the brain with a patented form of acetylcholine. Look, I can truly say Mosh bars taste heavenly, and I've been loving their banana bread bars. The energy boost these bad boys give me in the morning is unparalleled. With the fresh kick of energy and brain health supporting supplements in their fresh formulas, you can bet I'll be coming back to them. If you want to find ways to give back to others and fuel your body and your brain, Mosh bars are the perfect choice for you. Head to moshlife.com/legalaf to save 20% off plus free shipping on either the Bestsellers Trial Pack or the new Plant-Based Trial Pack. That's 20% off plus free shipping on either the Bestsellers or Plant-Based Trial Pack at moshlife.com/legalaf. Thank you, Mosh, for sponsoring this episode. Now, the other thing we should gives us some comfort and solace is that almost all of the Jan 6 insurrectionists were charged with more crimes than just 1512C2. So they have other crimes. And the judge in sentencing for those crimes can take into account the conduct that has now been vacated as an independent charge. Let me repeat that. Just because a charge has been reversed or vacated by the United States Supreme Court doesn't mean the underlying conduct that formed the basis of the indictment and the conviction and ultimately the sentencing can't be taken into account by the judge in sentencing. And so those that are now charged or have been convicted by other crimes, the judge in sentencing and also recalculation of sentencing, people can be brought back in. If one of their charges got thrown out, the judge can say, well, it got thrown out, but you did all of those bad things. You were convicted of all of those bad things. And now I'm going to give you the higher level related to the crimes that remain. That is the reality. And I do think it was genius by the Department of Justice to say in its plea deal, knowing that 1512C2 was up for grabs, right, with the United States Supreme Court at the time, because that appeal came relatively early. And Judge Nichols, Carl Nichols, the judge at the D.C. Circuit Court level, who had made the original decision, which has now been sort of upheld, that 1512C2 has to deal with kind of actually physically getting your hands on records. That's not what the Supreme Court says now. It says integrity and validity and things that go to invalidating are also fair game for prosecution. But the Department of Justice, knowing that 1512C2 could be ripped off the books, had a provision in their plea deals that said if you lose 1512C2, if we lose it, we have the right to go back after you and prosecute you for everything that's listed in your indictment, for other charges, including charges that we agreed to drop as part of the plea deal. So it's not like the jails in Washington are going to be open and the floodgates open and all these people are going to be flying out. Trust me, the Department of Justice has now, since that ruling, been going over with a fine-tooth comb trying to figure out how to keep these people in and how to use this in their sentencing. And as I said, there's very few that fit the description. I think it's like 20 that only were charged and convicted of one count of obstruction of an official proceeding. Now, can they be retried again? Depends on their plea deal, depends on what the courts ultimately rule. But I think it gives us some solace about the use of 1512C2 in the future, because if you rip these things off the books, this is the part the Supreme Court doesn't recognize. All it's going to do is lead to more and encourage more bad behavior, especially at the urging of Donald Trump. As I said at the top of the hot take, it wasn't by accident that these people thought that they would, whatever they got away with, whatever they could get away with, would go without criminal punishment. That's why you use GoPros and create and fabricate your own evidence against yourself with social media, because you don't think you're going to get prosecuted, or you're going to get, you're going to get a pardon. And Donald Trump has said, including at the debate, he's going to pardon these people. He thinks they're political prisoners. That's what he calls them, who have been unjustly held. That's because he's never read all of the indictments and all the evidence and seen the videos about these people who are doing battle, medieval battle, with whatever they could get their hands on, either brought with them, brought in, or picked up along the way, like bicycle racks, police batons, police shields, face masks, whatever they could find, to bludgeon their way into the Capitol and not letting Metro or Capitol Police stand in their way. Those are the people that we're talking about when we talk about 1512C2. So I wanted to kind of just take a deep breath here. We're going to do some analysis over the summer of what the 60 or 70 cases by this United States Supreme Court during its term and its rulings mean. We of course focus on the ones that matter to liberty and justice, like the one for immunity and all of that. But I wanted to focus on this one as well, about the future and what it means for bad behavior and the ability to go after it in the future by the Department of Justice. Now, some people might be wringing their hands about, why did the Department of Justice use that particular account? Look, on the face of it, as I've said in prior hot takes and on Legal AF, the Department of Justice can't manufacture new crimes to charge people with conduct they've never seen before. They have to use existing law, existing crimes on the books, and map it onto new conduct they've never seen before, right? It's up to the next Congress, hopefully led by Blue, to create specific laws that would go and map directly onto the conduct observed on January 6th. I think the Department of Justice did a valiant job in trying to take existing crimes and figure out a way to apply it to this new bad conduct. I mean, even the Trump Department of Justice used 1512C2 before Joe Biden even got into office against these same insurrectionists. That's how Joe Biggs, right? That's how Chansley, those two guys got indicted and some convicted, or they took a plea deal, even before Joe Biden took office. Jason Chansley and Joe Biggs. So it's not like, Biden's Department of Justice made a mistake. And it's not the special counsel, it's main justice that handled all of these things in prosecuting all of these Jan 6 insurrectionists. So we'll continue to follow the aftermath of the Supreme Court's decision, along with Ketanji Brown Jackson's concurrence of the use of 1512C2 to go after the validity and integrity angle as a way to continue to use those charges against this set of insurrectionists.
I wanted to talk to you is I am conducting an ongoing investigation for quite some time now on a subject by the name of Jeffrey Epstein.
Another release of court evidence against sexual predator Jeffrey Epstein is shedding new light on the Palm Beach, Florida investigation that could have put a stop to his widespread sex trafficking operation and what happened that led to Epstein basically getting off scot-free. What we're learning about not only what was said during grand jury proceedings, but also police interviews with Epstein's alleged victims. This will shock you. We're breaking it all down with current Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So media outlets like the Miami Herald, Palm Beach Post, CNN, and more, they have been fighting for years to get their hands on documents related to a Florida investigation into infamous predator Jeffrey Epstein. Now, before we get into this latest development, and there's a lot to talk about, we need to provide you some backstory. So the Palm Beach Police Department, they opened up an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein back in 2005. This after the parents of a 14-year-old girl came forward accusing the financier of paying her to give him a massage. The police find out that Epstein had purportedly set up a system to recruit girls to provide him massages and sometimes other sexual activity. So the case was brought to the state attorney's office, a grand jury was impaneled, and they indicted Jeffrey Epstein in 2006 on felony solicitation of prostitution. Now, as you're about to see, the argument is he could have been hit with much more serious charges. This didn't even encompass a fraction of his purported criminal conduct. In fact, it has been reported that the Palm Beach Police Department chief and lead detective were particularly troubled by this prosecution, so they refer the matter to the FBI, and the FBI brings it to the assistant U.S. attorney. Now, in the end, what happens? In 2008, Epstein and prosecutors, they work out a deal where he pled guilty to state charges of solicitation of prostitution and procurement of minors for prostitution. He's sentenced to 18 months in prison, only serves 13, spends most of the time in a work release program where he can leave the jail to work at his office and then go back to jail at night. And of course, he avoids federal charges. He had to register as a sex offender too, but this is why people call this a sweetheart deal. And it was very, very controversial, especially knowing what we know now. Survivors and their attorneys allege that if Florida prosecutors had charged Epstein correctly and thrown the book at him, he would have been unable to continue hurting girls in New York and beyond. And there have been allegations that prosecutors were concerned about him and his legal team, that there were allegations about his ties to the rich and powerful that may have protected him from more serious consequences. We can't verify the motivations behind all this, just to say this is part of the conversation that is circulated. Then, we know in 2019 what happened. He's arrested on New York federal sex trafficking charges. He winds up dead in his jail cell before going to trial. Authorities conclude he took his own life. And as for his accomplice, girlfriend, Madam Ghislaine Maxwell, who helped Epstein procure young girls to assault, she was found guilty of sex trafficking and sentenced to 20 years in prison. But now, let's talk about what's happening today. Let's talk about this investigation that happened back in 2005, 2006 in the grand jury that was impaneled, like I mentioned. And a little quick primer on this. We've talked about grand jury proceedings before. They are highly secretive. It's a way for prosecutors to indict a defendant by presenting evidence and witnesses to a secret panel. But what happens? A Palm Beach Post investigation in 2019 revealed that the then Palm Beach County State Attorney Barry Kersher actually seemingly torpedoed his own case in front of the grand jurors. Or at least that's the allegation. Because when the Post published its investigation, it also sued for the release of the grand jury documents. And it has been fighting the courts ever since. Well, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida signed a bill that required a judge to release the information on July 1st or after. And the judge did just that on Monday. Judge Luis Delgado released all of this evidence in the investigation in grand jury. And I will tell you, and I can't emphasize this enough, this is a massive trove of evidence. It includes hundreds of pages of documents, audio recordings, video interviews with alleged victims, and more. Some of it is in better quality than others. But in this episode, what we're going to be doing is diving into what the grand jury transcripts reveal, as well as what the teen girls told police happened to them at Jeffrey Epstein's mansion. So Judge Delgado called Epstein, quote, the most infamous pedophile in American history. The details in the record will be outrageous to decent people. The testimony taken by the grand jury concerns activity ranging from grossly unacceptable to rape. All of the conduct at issue is sexually deviant, disgusting, and criminal. And now to give you an idea of that, let's play you now some portions of law enforcement's interview with these victims. In fact, this is an interview with a young woman who says she's 20, but she was 19 when she had this interaction with Epstein.
She told me about this guy I was short on rent 1 month, and she told me that all I had to do was give him a massage and he would give me $200. And that's pretty much it. And I thought about it, I was like, I really need the money. I've asked my parents, they can't give me the money. I asked everyone I knew, and I went there with her. I gave him a massage, and it was a weird situation.
Okay, have you have any formal massage training?
No.
Did you provide the massage with clothing on?
All I had was underwear on. She did not tell me that. I was absolutely surprised when I got there. I knew nothing.
Okay. Did she tell you that you would have to provide the massage with just underwear?
No.
First of all, aside from how disgusting this is consistent with the allegations that Epstein had women or girls recruit other girls to be abused. And we're not going to go into details of more of what he did during that session, or allegedly did during that session, but I want you to listen to how tough this is for her to recount all this.
And did anything else happen?
I'm sorry, I don't like thinking back on this, so...
Okay, first of all, I know this is hard on you,
Mm-hmm.
okay? I know that you put this behind you.
Yeah.
A lot of people that I've talked to have,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
You're not the only person that he's done this to.
And now listen to how this whole episode ended, because it gets weird and it gets creepy.
He just got up and walked out. He's like, okay, you can put your clothes on, and he closed the door. Yes.
And you were paid how much?
$200. He asked me for my phone number just in case he wanted to call me and come back, and they called me, and I never called them back. They called me with a bunch of different phone numbers, and I picked up one time, and after that, I never picked up again because I didn't know who the numbers were, and they left me several messages, and I never called them back.
Very similar to the allegations we heard during the Ghislaine Maxwell trial about recruitment and contact and staying in touch with these victims. But that is not all this young woman had to say.
The whole situation was odd. When we first pulled up, before we even got out of the car, she said, don't say anything, don't speak unless you're spoken to. So I was like, you know, what the hell are you getting me into? You know what I mean? So I didn't say anything, and there was pictures, there were pencil drawings of naked people. I don't know if that's all that looked really weird.
My investigation deals with Jeff,
Okay.
and that's who I'm looking into at this time. Okay?
All right, I hope you do something about it.
Now, I want you to remember that comment about the drawings. We're going to get back to that in a second. But as I said, she wasn't the only person to speak to police.
A friend of mine told me about Jeffrey. She said she was helping him find girls. We're not friends anymore, though, so you can't mention my name to her. And she told me basically that you just go and you give him a massage for about an hour and for $200. And obviously that sounds a little too good to be true, and as I found out, it wasn't quite what she said. He has the girls take off their clothes and give him a massage, and he likes watching them.
How old were you when you first started with this?
I'm not sure if it was before or after my 17th birthday. So I was either 16, about to be 17, or I just turned 17.
Yeah. By the way, you remember when I said the drawings? Well, one of the things that's included in this document release, this material release, is a collection of walkthrough videos that were taken by police when they issued a search warrant on Epstein's Palm Beach property. And aside from just how chilling it is to see the inner workings of his residence, there were odd things like framed pictures of Ghislaine Maxwell and pictures and photos of naked women. Actually, here's an officer reading some of the search warrant.
Police officers of Palm Beach County, Florida, being the premises occupied or under the control of Jeffrey Epstein, white male, date of birth 1/20/53, and there is now being kept in the above described premises certain computers, including electromagnetic, optical, electrochemical, or other high-speed data processing device performing logical, arithmetic, or storage functions, any notes, ledger, personal phone books, Rolodex, books, and any form of recording data of records in payments, telephone numbers, and names of girls that have frequented the house. The laws prohibiting sexual activities with certain minors, a second-degree felony. Lewd lascivious molestation, the second-degree felony. This is your copy. When we are concluded, I will leave a list of what items were taken. Okay? I would ask that you don't answer the telephone. I know that the gentleman had was having a conversation with Mr. Epstein at the time. So I'm sure he's trying to call to find out what's going on. He will be told what was going on as soon as we're done.
By the way, a lot of litigation surrounding the Epstein case. We've talked about that before on other sidebars. And speaking of litigation, let me talk about specialists in this area, specifically the personal injury litigation area. Morgan & Morgan, our incredible sponsor, America's largest injury law firm. Let me talk about them. You know why they're so big? Because they win a lot. They have secured verdicts and settlements in the multi-millions. They will fight to protect your legal rights and for what you deserve in compensation. But one of the best things about Morgan & Morgan is how easy they make this whole process for their clients. From starting your claim to uploading documents to signing contracts to talking to your legal team, all can be done from your smartphone. Also, no upfront fee. You only pay them if you win. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar or by dialing pound law, that's pound 529 on your phone. Now, there is a lot in this document release. There are copies of phone notes for Jeffrey Epstein, phone logs, email conversations regarding the plea negotiations, news articles. But I will tell you one of the most controversial aspects, something that we have to talk about further, and that has already been discussed a lot in the news, is the court transcripts of the grand jury testimony. And that included testimony of a 16-year-old girl who says she was 14 when Jeffrey Epstein abused her. Now, I believe he was in his 50s at the time this happened, so keep that in mind. Now, this victim said again, when she was 14, an acquaintance, another teen, asked her if she wanted to make $200. She said all that she would have to do is give this man, Jeffrey Epstein, a massage. She said she spoke with a female assistant of Epstein's who asked her how old she was. The girl's acquaintance had told the victim she should lie and say she was 18, so she did because she said she wanted to make money. So the acquaintance picked her up, took her to Epstein's home in Palm Beach, where a security guard met them and let them through. And the teen testified that an assistant took her upstairs to a room with a massage table, told her to get undressed down to her bra and underwear before Jeffrey Epstein came in a towel. I'm not going to go into further detail of the encounter, but Epstein had apparently offered $300 for something else. And this is where it gets really disturbing on a different level, because I want you to listen to this questioning. The prosecutor points out that when the girl originally spoke with the detective, parts of her story were a little different. The girl said she was scared. So the transcript of this grand jury testimony, again in front of the grand jurors, question: so you didn't want to admit that you had allowed him to touch you? Answer: yeah. Okay, and he gave you $300? Uh-huh. You left your number so he could contact you again? Yes. I think a fair argument would be is that the prosecutor seems to be placing the impetus on her. Remember, this is a child we're talking about, someone who couldn't give consent. So obviously you could look at this line of questioning and say how improper it was, what was the motivation there. On the other hand, you could say maybe a prosecutor has a duty to present exculpatory evidence as well. So asking her about inconsistencies, like you say the assistant asked you to undress, but then you told the detective Epstein told you to do that. So then it may be necessary for the prosecutor to present what could be exculpatory evidence about Jeffrey Epstein to the jury during this grand jury process. But there's more. Because later in the transcript, the prosecutor is asking the witness about other things going on in her life, and the girl admitted she'd experimented with drugs and at one point was sent away to a camp for troubled teens. Transcript says, question: do you drink beer? Answer: at parties. It says you have 4 piercings. Not anymore. Now I used to have my belly button pierced. You have to be 18 in the state of Florida to have body piercings other than your ears. How? My dad. How did you get those? My dad took me to get my belly button pierced for my 14th birthday because like everybody was getting one, so I begged for it, and then I just got my nose pierced. Did you have to provide identification for your nose just to prove you were 18? No, my dad let me. Your dad, okay. So you didn't have false identification at that time? No. Okay. So you said yes to drinking and smoking pot? Yeah. Then the prosecutor asks this witness, you're aware that you committed a crime? Now I am. I didn't know it was a crime when I was doing it. Like, I don't know. I guess it was prostitution or something like that. Now, in a grand jury process, it's not unusual for grand jurors to submit questions to the witnesses. And that is what happened here. It wasn't even submitting written questions. It was asking directly the questions. The prosecutors offered jurors a chance to ask questions. And I will tell you, it wasn't easy. It was quite brutal. For example, one juror asked, do you have any idea deep down inside of you that what you're doing is wrong? Yeah, I did. Oh, do you? There's another question. And you're well aware that what you're doing to your own reputation? Yes, I do. Huh. Another juror asked, did it ever occur to you that he could have hacked you up? The witness responds, yes, I thought about it a lot. And then the juror responds, you should give it a little further thought. Wow. Wow. Now, it's almost like they're shaming her in a way, or suggesting that she should have known better, almost like they're guiding her about how to live her life. So it was very troubling to see this line of questioning, but we're going to talk about it more with Dave Arenberg in a minute. Now, we did hear the opposite. We heard one young woman who testified about how Epstein had sexual relations with her as a teenager, and one juror asked her, do you think he took advantage of your youth? The response was maybe, but it was also stupid of me to put myself in that situation. The response from the juror was, perhaps you were too young to be up against a man of that age who had more control over you and that you know. Now, the prosecutor also called in for the grand jury Palm Beach Police Detective Joe Riccari for questioning, and he talked about an interview he did with a woman who said she was 17 when she met Jeffrey Epstein and that she started bringing girls over to his home. According to the grand jury transcript, Detective Riccari said, quote, she agreed to bring the girls to him, and he told her the younger, the better. She brought a 23-year-old to massage him, and he told her that she was too old, and he wanted someone younger. Knowing that she went to a local school, he recommended that she ask her friends. During the statement, she gave me approximately 6 names that she can remember that she took to the house that all went to the school. So it's pretty horrifying stuff all around. Well, now I want to do something. I want to bring in a very special guest and somebody who has a very interesting connection to this. The current Palm Beach State Attorney, Dave Arenberg, to talk more about this. Dave, great to see you. So the Palm Beach prosecutor at the time, Barry Kirscher, and the lead prosecutor who was doing the questioning in the grand jury, Lana Belovic, I might be mispronouncing her name, they have taken quite a bit of heat over their handling of the Epstein case, and particularly how the case was presented to the grand jury. I've mentioned how there's an analysis or an argument to make that were they trying to not get an indictment back? Were they trying to tank their own case? What's your perspective on it?
Well, good to be with you, Jesse. So Barry Kirscher, who was a state attorney at the time, he doesn't do many interviews. That's his style. He was more about prosecuting cases than to do the media stuff. And it's very different than mine. I do a lot of the media stuff. So this is not an instance where all of a sudden he's clamming up. That's just his thing. He never liked to talk to the media. And so I can tell you this. I came in 6 years after the case was finally over. I started as state attorney in 2013. So it was multiple state attorney administrations after Barry Kirscher was state attorney. And as far as what went on back then, I can only speculate. I did not see the grand jury transcripts, didn't have access to them until they were released by the court. I saw them when you did. And my take on the question of why would a prosecutor try to intentionally tank their case is that I don't think they were trying to intentionally tank the case. I think what happened is that they were living in a different time. They were living in a time when if you were an underage girl who engaged in sex acts for money, you were seen under the law as a lawbreaker, as a criminal, as a prostitute. Nowadays, thankfully, the law has changed. We have a different attitude towards it to understand that these young women, these girls, were victims, as they are. They were victims of exploitation, of sexual assault, but it was a different time back then. They had different laws in the books, and I think the questions reflected the laws at the time and the sentiment at the time. You saw it wasn't just the prosecutor who made a question that we now find offensive. It was two of the grand jurors, apparently, were asking these tough questions. And it doesn't look good. I, too, just like you, I thought the grand jury records were disturbing. And I understand why the decisions that the prosecutors made back then are being revisited now. And I'm not trying to justify what happened.
Right.
I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm just trying to provide a little insight into it.
And if you can do that, that would be helpful, because again, people are looking this with the lens. They went out of their way to make sure Jeffrey Epstein was not prosecuted, or not prosecuted for serious crimes, right? That's what the allegation is. That's the viewpoint people are looking at. And would you say the line of questioning, both by the jurors and the prosecutor, was appropriate? Or was it more the idea of, you heard me say before, prosecutors have to present sometimes exculpatory information to grand jurors. Was it a way to say, listen, she's providing this testimony, but we're going to, hit on some things that are inconsistencies, some problems in her background? I mean, was there any part of it that you felt was appropriate, or am I looking at it completely wrong?
Well, it was 160 some odd pages. I did not read every line of all the pages, so I can't say what line I found appropriate or inappropriate. I just know what I saw, and what I saw in the grand jury records, they were disturbing. And I like I said, I'm not going to justify it. I only add that when the prosecutors have a case, any case, they take it to the grand jury and they want to test the case before the grand jurors, and they want to see if they could get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. Although the standard for getting an indictment is just probable cause, it's really not a very high standard. Prosecutors don't want to bring a case unless they think they can get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And in this case, you had some very high-powered defense lawyers who were doing a full court press against these young victims, and they were doing with private investigators, and according to reports, presenting prosecutors with all this information that perhaps was then used against them in the grand jury. But also, according to reports, there were only 2 victims who appeared before the grand jury when there were several other victims.
Yeah. Why is that? Why weren't more people brought in?
We don't know, because grand juries are done in secret, and I have no inside information on it because I came into this job years later. But I can say this, since we don't know, it is possible that there was a lack of cooperation, especially when there are reports, and it was in fact, the book Filthy Rich, which I read, where the girls were intimidated by private investigators and others. And so that could be one explanation, that they did not want to participate in this process because of perhaps intimidation, or it was an imposing process to go before this secret grand jury. And so you had 2 victims, and then you saw what happened with them inside the grand jury.
When you look at this in totality, and I know you haven't had a chance to look at all the materials, I mean, it's so much a breadth of materials here, but do you think it's a fair assessment to say that he could have been brought up on much serious charges, both state charges and federal charges? Because it seemed to me, based on the investigation and the materials that were presented, you could have had sexual assault charges, perhaps rape. You could have had even sex trafficking charges. I think that could be a fair assessment. But you tell me if I'm wrong. After looking at all these materials, is it fair to say he could have been stopped?
Oh, there's no doubt he could have been brought up on more serious charges. Yes. Now, as far as human trafficking, the laws have changed in human trafficking significantly. So I don't know what the laws were at that time, back in 2006. Human trafficking was still in infancy with laws being passed and people starting to understand what it was. But I do think, and I agree with you, that tougher sanctions could have been applied to him. And I think that's why a lot of people are upset at what happened, because he was not stopped. He was sent to jail for, I believe it was 13 months. He had that work release program, and then he got out and did it again. But eventually, he was caught. Unfortunately, there were too many victims in its wake.
And I mean, one of the witnesses testified that Epstein sexually assaulted a stripper who was screaming no. So when I talk about, is there other charges that they could have brought him on, or at least investigated? And I look at the breadth of this material, and I wonder, do we have a better answer today about why these charges were not brought. There's a lot of it that's the communications between government attorneys about the plea negotiations. Do you think we have currently or will have a better understanding about why he was not charged as thoroughly as he could have been after the release of these materials?
I don't know. The materials only tell you so much. I think you'd have to get into the minds of the prosecutors back then, and if they decided to speak up. Also, the federal prosecutors. Remember, this wasn't just a state prosecution. This went before the federal prosecutor's office, the U.S. Attorney's office, that got involved and then reached a deal, which was not only a deal that led to what you saw, the 13 months in county jail, but also a non-prosecution agreement in the future where you couldn't prosecute them for other acts, which was not just Jeffrey Epstein, but Ghislaine Maxwell and others, which was such a broad immunity deal that the Southern District of New York said, we're not going to even agree to this. We're not going to listen to it or obey it. We're going to go our own way years later, and we're going to ignore that non-prosecution deal that was in the Southern District of Florida because we are the Sovereign District of New York. That's a nickname for the Southern District of New York. And that's how Ghislaine Maxwell was charged. That's how Jeffrey Epstein was charged again, even though they still had this non-prosecution agreement, which probably made them believe they were going to be immune for life, which was incredibly broad agreement that was kept from the victims of the case. Another disturbing part of this case was that the victims were kept in the dark of all this.
And let's talk about this document release in the sense I've seen some people say, and you have to imagine this was the motivation by Governor DeSantis to ultimately authorize the release of this, that this is a great thing for transparency and understanding what was happening. At the same time, there's an argument that this can create pain and embarrassment for the people who spoke up. So is this a good thing or a bad thing that these materials have just been released?
Well, the victims and their lawyers wanted this to be released. So I think it's a good thing. When the victims said we want transparency and they get transparency, I think it's a good thing. It's important to keep grand jury records secret in general. That's why the law here only applied to this case. It was written in such a narrow way. And although it was Governor DeSantis who signed it, the credit really goes to the legislators who worked with the local clerk and comptroller, Joseph Abruzzo, to draft this up and then get it through the legislature. It took a couple years to get it through. They had to draft it so narrowly where it really only applied to this one case where, for example, the person of interest here is dead and these particular things have happened. And that's why we're able to get this in a very remarkable, unique situation. And I think it's always better to have transparency. But, in the criminal justice system, there are reasons why, in general, that grand juries are secret. You do want to protect the witnesses to speak freely. But in a case like this, where the victims are demanding it and the witnesses want this and the perpetrator here is dead, then I think this was a step in the right direction.